place where we talk about things important to your soul. And before I get started, I just want to mention that it would be great if you're on YouTube, that you would subscribe. Otherwise, at least like us, maybe even support us on Patreon. We'd like to be here for a long time to serve you. Today's guest, I'm very excited to talk to because I had an intro about her from her daughter. And if you watch these podcasts religiously, you may know that her daughter is Sarah Silk, and today's guest is Louise Silk. And in that interview with Sarah, she had so many good things to say about Louise. In fact, I made some notes because she rescued Sarah multiple times in her life.
I did.
Including pretty recently in her adult life. She sees her mother as a definite role model, that her mother has so many talents and things that she needs still to learn from. She's an artist to emulate and just all around a great person. So I knew I just had to meet Louise. Louise is a Pittsburgh-based artist, writer, and quilter. For over 40 years, she's been creating art that combines aesthetics and functionality with meanings and memories for family and friends and individuals and organizations. Now she's joined forces with her daughter at SilkDenim, a web-based shop selling one-of-a-kind, handcrafted, 100% recycled clothing, bags, and quilts. So Louise herself began her career as a fiber artist pretty much because of a 1972 article in Ms. Magazine, and I'm curious about that, so
That's
we'll
true.
get into that later. But she's done an awful lot, and she's got a show coming up where she's the focus of it at the Heinz History Center here in Pittsburgh. So, as I said to her, that makes her a Pittsburgh institution. So we've got a lot of different things to get into and different areas. So I think I'm going to stop with the intro because I have about 4 pages of stuff we can talk about.
That's silly.
So I'm going to stop and just let Louise talk about her spiritual journey from childhood until now.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Bob. It's really nice to be here, and thank you for interviewing Sarah and finding me. It's nice to be seen and heard. I grew up here in the East End of Pittsburgh, in East Liberty. I went to Fulton and Peabody High School. I grew up in a secular Jewish family. There was no real talk of religion. It was all cultural. The only religious things we did were have a Passover Seder, which right now is Passover, to acknowledge that. And my parents went to synagogue once a year in the high holidays. And other than that, nothing, no kind of religious. I liked Sunday school, so I went to Sunday school, but that was just because I was a good student and I liked it. I liked going.
Now, Sunday school sounds like a Christian thing. Is it Saturday school in your
No,
religion?
it is Sunday school
Sunday
because
school.
Saturday, if you're an observant Jew, Saturday is a holy day, and you don't study. Wouldn't go to school or anything like that. Like you don't cook But my parents were not religious. But yes, I belong to B'nai Israel, which is the synagogue that was here in East End, and we had Sunday school, and we had a confirmation when you were 16, and there was a bar and bat mitzvah, which is what children do when they become of age in the religion. But in my day, my parents didn't think girls needed to have a religious training. Only boys did.
Right.
So my brother had a bar mitzvah, but I had no training again, Sunday school just because I wanted to go. I don't think it was mandatory in any way, shape, or form. Right. Right. So, and I went to Peabody, and really I was just a good little girl. I didn't do too much of anything, except when I went to home economics, I found out that I really could sew, and I really liked to sew. And so when I was ready to go to college, I asked my home ec teacher what I should do, and she said, you should go to Drexel in Philadelphia. And I was a good little girl. I just did what everybody told me. So I applied and got into Drexel, and that's where I got a degree in home economic education. And in that time was the beginning of, it was the 60s. There was a lot of upheaval. Things were changing. And I joined a women's consciousness raising group in that time in Philadelphia. And also at that time, Ms. Magazine began its publication. So I subscribed to Ms. Magazine. I went to my consciousness raising group. I was just only until that point in time, just a good little girl who had a boyfriend from 9th grade and stood beside him and looked cute. Like, that was my job. Yeah. And that was really all that I thought to do until I read this article in Ms. Magazine. And it was about quilt making as a woman's art form. And basically the point of the article was that men didn't care about it. So women were off by themselves doing this amazing work. And I read the article, and I knew that that's what I would do. And no one in my family quilted. I didn't know any quilters, but I was a home economics teacher, so I taught myself to quilt. And it took me 2 years to make my first quilt. And my first quilt is going to be in the exhibit at the History Center, just on the side of that.
So you still have your very first quilt?
I didn't have it, but my son had it. He used to keep it in the back of his car as a car quilt. So we've resurrected it for that purpose. So yeah, I do have my very first quilt. Yes.
That's amazing.
It is amazing because that was 1972. Yes. So I moved back to Pittsburgh, and I had 2 children, 3 children actually at that point. Somewhere
in there that you got married.
I got married to my high school boyfriend, and I'm a home economics teacher, but I know it doesn't really fit me very well. But I did it for a while, and I came back to Pittsburgh, and I had these little children, and I lived in Point Breeze, and I had the opportunity in my synagogue, B'nai Israel, still the same synagogue in the East End, to have an adult bat mitzvah. And I really didn't know anything about the religion because of the way I grew up. Yeah. Like, I didn't know why when you go in the synagogue, people stand up and sit down. Well, why are they doing that? I had no idea. I didn't understand that the calendar revolved around the moon. That I just, what was it just didn't make any sense. I just didn't know anything. Sunday school wasn't that good.
So I guess not.
No. So I went about and had an adult bat mitzvah. I had a bat mitzvah when Sarah was 2, and it was so wonderful to learn as an adult, because as an adult you really can ask good questions, and you can really think through the answers, and the meaning behind it starts to have meaning.
Yeah, sure.
Rather than as just a 13-year-old. In some ways, I think it was a lucky break, in that doing it as an adult, it was much more meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll fast forward a little bit just to say that I was doing very well in my quilting. I had joined the Fiber Arts Guild of Pittsburgh. I was an associated art. I was really starting to see myself as a quilt artist and all that, and seeing a lot of success with it. But it seemed a little empty to me, and another important part of that is that I was doing very much a Jewish life, in the fact that I was volunteering, and I was doing my parents were strong Zionists at the time, and I was working for the Jewish Federation, volunteering, and I was the volunteer coordinator for the resettlement of Soviet Jews in Pittsburgh in the early 89, 90s. We resettled 540 Soviet dissidents. Mm-hmm. They weren't dissidents, but they were Jews that were released from the Soviet Union. Yeah. And I was the volunteer coordinator. So I knew so till that point in time, my Jewish life was very separate from my quilting life. I knew that quilters weren't Jewish, and Jews didn't quilt, but I didn't really know. I just knew that they were separate.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why. I can tell you. I found out why afterwards. I could tell you that now. Or,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
It turns out that the reason that Jews don't quilting, patchwork, is really an American art form. And when most Jews came over from Europe, they brought over the needle crafts of knitting, crocheting, embroidery, needlepoint, which is what my mother did, all those things.
Right.
But they stayed kind of in their groups, their shtetl groups. So even though my mother lived in the East End, all of her friends were Jewish, and so she really wasn't exposed to quilting. It was just a very simple idea of not being exposed. And now me being more assimilated, and reading Ms. Magazine, I was exposed to the idea of American patchwork. So I got the idea that what would happen if I quilted something Jewish. Just never been done. Maybe I'm seeing now that that's really my best skill. That's how maybe I could learn about Judaism and quilt it. And I applied to the Jewish Community Center of Pittsburgh. I had a very nice gallery, of which I never wanted to be a part of because I thought it was Jewish. I was making this whole separation, artificial separation, but I was making it. And I knew 2.5 years in advance that I would have an exhibit, a one-person exhibit at the Jewish Community Center. I had it in 1994. And the topic of it would be about Judaism.
Okay, let me stop you there just for a second. You
Yes.
say you knew 2.5 years in advance.
Right.
Was that a knowing that you had, or was it
No.
a scheduling
Yeah,
thing?
it was a scheduling thing.
Okay.
Yes. Well,
All right.
I had a goal.
Yeah.
to learn about Judaism and somehow portray it. And then I looked at how could I do that. And then I looked at the Jewish Community Center, who had a nice gallery. And then I made a sample piece, the first piece in the exhibit. I went to the gallery director and I said, "This is my idea." And she said, "Slotted you in 2.5 years." Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I knew I
see.
had that long period of time.
Yeah.
I studied with a rabbi, I went to classes, and I made a body of work that was all about Judaism. Like, for example, I made a book about creation, and the book had 6 pages. And the idea was, in order for you to view the work, you had to turn the pages. So it's the idea of co-creation with God.
So this was a fiber-based book?
Totally. Everything
Okay.
was a quilt or quilt-like,
Yeah.
because that's what I did or what I do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Another one was, I was very upset with I studied with an Orthodox rabbi, and I found the orthodoxy very oppressive, and there were lots of things that didn't make sense to me, and I was very, very angry with him, actually. And I I wanted to do something like that would be unacceptable, and I kept really trying to work it out in my mind. And I ended up I made a spiritual tent for women only. Men weren't allowed to go in the tent.
Uh-huh.
It was only for women, because I understood that women had this kind of spiritual nature, that they weren't so stuck on the power and the rules, and it was more cooperative. It was more like quilting in that way.
Yeah.
And I want to exclude the men, just as they were excluding me in the religion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
those were just 2 examples. So I knew that now, as I'm developing the work, that this is beyond an art exhibit. This is something really bigger than an art exhibit, and it needs a ritual, because that's the thing about in religious or spiritual things. You have some kind of ritual that adds meaning to it. So I contacted a young woman rabbi that I knew in the area, and I tell her this whole story, like I've just told you, and she says to me, "Oh, well, it looks like you're trying to find your voice." And there's a term, it's called kol isha, it means woman's voice, but it's a negative term, and it means that the reason women and men are separated is because women's voice, if men hear them, they might be stimulated by that, and they shouldn't be. So rather than not be stimulated or control yourselves, let's just take the women and put them aside. And she said, but you're finding your voice. And so I ended up making a voice quilt. I asked 36 women to participate with me. And I got quotes I started all the way back in the Hebrew Bible with Sarah, Mother Sarah, and all the way through up to people like Bella Abzug and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 36 people, and quotes that they had, words that they had actually said out loud. There were their quotes. And because I was 43 at the time, I decided that if I lived to be 86, that'd be pretty good. I'd be happy with that. So I ended up calling it my midlife ritual, and all the women came, and I had a place for them to stand on the floor of the JCC gallery, and they spelled, the way they were standing, their bodies spelled the word voice, and I became the dot on the I of voice, and I wrote a prayer and acknowledged that, and that was what I did.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty. It was pretty amazing, and really meaningful, for everyone, and for Sarah too. Sarah was one of the dots, one of the people in that.
At what age was she at that point?
She was like about in 5th or 6th grade, and by the way, the boys in her grade were very upset about the tent. There was a lot of discussion with them of why they couldn't go in the tent and what was the idea of the tent. They were very boisterous boys.
Well, boys love tents.
Yeah,
that's just a given.
Yeah, the tent went on to have other lives, and I ended up taking off women only.
Oh.
I ended up realizing that we're going to get beyond that.
Okay.
So yes. All right, so now I'm going to keep on going.
Go for it.
So I was going, doing well. I was really still close with my parents. My husband and I had a big financial crisis, and we realized that we had lost our emotional bond. And he left. He left the family, and I. At the same time, my mother had Alzheimer's disease, and my father died, and like all these things happened to me at one time.
Lots of trauma.
And lots of trouble. And when my father died, I took all of my parents' clothing and textiles, every piece of their clothing and textiles, everything, and took it lock, stock, and barrel into my studio and just piled it up in my studio. And I determined that I was going to use every piece of their clothing and textiles to make quilts. I was going to make every quilt I could. And that turned out to be a second exhibition. It was called Pieces of Memory. And it was really a cathartic way for me to deal with the loss of my parents. And I saw and experienced the miracle, really, of, well, first of all, how much, that isn't a miracle, but how much the textiles hold. You only need a little small piece of your dad's shirt to remember everything about your dad, and so it was very powerful, and it was a very powerful exhibition. Now, for that exhibition, I knew again that now I know I'm beyond openings with cheese and wine. I've already done one ritual. I need another ritual. And this time I went to, I left out a long chart of the history, which is not the spiritual history, but I had met another person, a partner, and he was very active in Zen Buddhism, and he belonged to the Rochester Zen Center. And so I had gone off, well, this is important for the spiritual part of it, because I had gone off to the Rochester Zen Center for several summers, from the time my husband left to the time that my father died.
Now, wait, where's the Washington Zen Center?
Rochester, New York.
So that's
New
York.
A very famous, actually, Zen Center, because Roshi Philip Kapleau, who was the Roshi there, he started it. He wrote a very, the 3 Pillars of Zen. He was kind of a well-known Zen practitioner. And I only got there because my partner had gone there. And in the first year that I met him, he wanted me to go to see the Zen Center first. I went for an introduction. Next year I went for a sesshin. You know, it kept on growing in my training. So I had now a lot of Zen training.
Now, my picture of this meeting of this new person in your life came from Sarah, that you were up there to see a Broadway show. Yes. And you met him coming out the door of the stage door.
Sarah is totally responsible for the, in Yiddish it's called a shidduch. A shidduch is when you make a match. Yes, we went to see Sarah Jessica Parker in Once Upon a Mattress, and afterwards we came to the stage door because Sarah wanted to see if she could get her to sign her program. And Sarah Jessica Parker didn't come down to the stage door. Her dresser came down and gave her the programs, and she went back up.
Okay.
So the reason that Sarah Jessica Parker didn't come down to the stage door was because across the street, Whoopi Goldberg was starring in A Funny Thing Happened to the Way to the Forum, and there was huge crowds for Whoopi Goldberg, and Sarah Jessica didn't, whatever. So, so the dresser says, let me take the playbills, I'll take them upstairs and Sarah will sign them. And at the same time Whoopi Goldberg is coming out, I say to Sarah, you go see if you can see Whoopi Goldberg, and I'll wait for the playbills. Yeah. So therefore I'm standing there, and the king, who was absolutely the best person in the show, he was magnificent. And the king, it's Once Upon a Mattress, and the king doesn't have a voice, so he does the whole thing by pantomime. Oh. So he was a Canadian actor who came down to do this part on Broadway. And I just tapped him on the shoulder and said, you did a really good job. And he turned around and said, thank you. And then he turned around again and he said, are you always like this? And I said, like what? And he said, you're just so calm, and you just seem like you're, I don't know what he said, but I said, yeah, that's me. And then he said, are you married? Do you want to go on a date? And I was like,
wow.
I had never been on a date. I had a boyfriend from the time I was 9th grade. And and that's how it started.
Okay.
Yes. So unfortunately, he died in 2005. But now I'm just getting a little bit ahead of that. But
yeah, that's all right.
But
life is not linear.
No. No. So I went to the Zen. So going back, I needed a ritual for this exhibit about my parents. It was called Pieces of Memory. And I went to there's a Pittsburgh Zen Center. It's in Sewickley. It's a wonderful place if you're at all interested in Zen Buddhism and you want to, and you're here in Pittsburgh, you should check it out. It's in Sewickley. And the person who started it, Kyoki Roberts, she's now deceased, but there's lineage there, and it's a really wonderful, it's just a wonderful resource that we have. And I went to Kyoki, and I said, Kyoki, I told her the whole story now, the whole story you've heard all the way up, and the voice quilt in the first one, and on and on and on. And she goes, well, Louise, the Tibetan Buddhists, you know how they make these sand mandalas, and they spend days and days making these sand mandalas, and then as soon as they're made, they blow them away.
Right.
She said, that's what you should do. You should unmake a quilt. I was like, oh no, unmake a quilt. Yeah, here we go. Well, that's, it's a really Zen concept and a very important concept. And here are my parents going away. So what I ended up doing was I had 43 women this time who participated in the ritual, and I asked them to bring me their pieces of their materials of memory, and I decided that because my parents were dying that I was heading up to the front and I had to stand out more, and I picked the image of a peacock, and I made myself a coat, and then I attached each of their pieces. I made each of their pieces an individual feather on the coat, and then they came and removed the feathers. And that was the ritual of unmaking a quilt. And Kyoki did it too. She was kind of a little annoyed with me because she turned out she grew up in Nebraska, and she had a quilt that she wanted me to really cut up and destroy, and I couldn't kind of do it, so I folded it and pieced it into a feather. And I could just remember her walking out of anyway, so yes, she felt like I could have done better, but I did what I could do, which is all that. So again, it was very meaningful for the 43 people and myself and for the people who saw it, and a great healing. And now, while I'm working on this exhibit, a friend of mine is with her friend. She's moving into her own office, and her friend's an interior designer, and I'm just kind of making small talk with the interior designer. What are you doing, Jan? What have you been doing lately? And she goes, oh, I've been doing a lot of funeral homes. And I said, funeral homes? Well, funeral. I said, maybe I have a product for funeral homes. And she was so interested. And I said, I can make I can make quilts of their materials to remember their loved ones. And she was very excited about the idea, and she helped me develop a brochure, and she tried to get me into the funeral home she was talking about, and we made samples, and it turns out that funeral homes aren't really the right time. Mm-hmm. It's just, I have done some quilts for funerals, but it's not really, it's not the right time. When some seniors move into assisted living or that kind of stuff, that's a good time. And also way after the fact, after the person is deceased, and you can kind of start to clean out the closet and deal with it a little bit. But Jan, we didn't know that, but it didn't matter to me, because I still developed this idea that I could make memory quilts for others, which began a very thriving business, which I still do to this day. Yeah. That's really the major source of my income, is making memory quilts for others.
So, just from my own knowledge of quilting, because my wife quilts, and I understand that quilting is now very mechanistic, like there are all kinds of machines and things.
It's true.
And I know that both you and Sarah do a lot of hand work.
Yes.
So are there machines involved in your quilting, or is this all handwork? Because that sounds pretty intensive to me.
I do a lot of handwork, and I do a lot of machine work, but quilting has become quite its own industry, and so there's a lot of machine quilting, there's a lot of intricate piecing, there's a lot of and I don't participate in any of that. I am a contemporary quilt artist.
Are you saying you don't do quilt shows?
No, I do. I enter quilt competitions.
All right.
I do. I try to find my niche and what makes me original, and a lot of the quilts that I sell on, we have Etsy sites. Sarah, SilkDenim has an Etsy site, and Silk Quilt, my personal, has an Etsy site. And those quilts are a piece by machine. And I started to say, I've had an industrial sewing machine, a straight stitch, just a simple straight stitch machine. I got it when Sarah was 3 months old, and it's still my workhorse. I still use it to this day. So all my piecing is done by this workhorse machine, of which it's phenomenal. I can do a lot in a very amazing short amount of time.
We need a brand name on this machine.
It's a Brother, Industrial Brother.
It's a Brother.
But the point is, it's an industrial machine.
Yeah.
And so that it's a little bit, the motor sits outside of it, and there's special features like a sewing machine works that a thread comes from the top and a thread comes from the bottom, and they intertwined, and you have to stop every time to wind your bobbin. In an industrial machine, you wind a bobbin while you're sewing, so you never have any downtime of winding your bobbin.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things like that in an industrial machine. So what happens is you can go much, much faster, and you can streamline the production. Yeah. So, I started to say, so if I have a quilt that I'm selling, and by the way, first let me say, I have an Amish woman that's worked for me for many, many years, and she hand quilts my quilts that I sell, and she charges by the yard of thread. And I've never met her. I do it all by the mail.
Sure.
And then if I'm doing art quilts, then those I do by I do them myself. I do a different kind of quilting, like a kind of a bigger stitch yarn kind of quilting.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I had a friend with an entry in the North Hills quilt show that was just last week, I think.
Yes, yes.
And I didn't get an opportunity to go up to that one, but
yeah.
I don't know. I watch my wife do it, and it is a real art form. I mean, it's just
yes.
It's just something, and there are so many different variations and themes, like you said.
Yeah.
So
she belongs to the North Hills Quilt Guild?
No, she doesn't. No.
No. We'll talk about that later.
Anyway, all right.
I have more. Do
you have more?
Keep
Okay,
going?
go ahead. No, there's time. I was just checking the time to make sure, and we got lots of time.
Okay, good, because it keeps going.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much. I'm developing a very good Zen practice. I'm very happy with that, and but still, it's always kind of in the back of my head. Where does Judaism fit in, and what are the spiritual? It's easy to, Zen is a practice, right? And so where in my religion, how am I going to find? And I'm still pretty much not happy with the orthodoxy, and also not really happy with the way. I mean, women are coming up, but it's very slow. I remember a teacher saying to me, it takes time. You have to be more patient. It's going to take time, and it wasn't good enough for me. And I had the opportunity through a friend. I had a meditation group, a Jewish meditation group, and I had just other things that were really other ways of exploring Judaism. And I had the opportunity to study with someone named Jason Schulman, who was doing what he called Kabbalistic healing. Mm-hmm. And Kabbalah is now the more esoteric part of Judaism.
Sort of the mystical side.
The mystical side of Judaism,
at, right?
Yeah. Kind of always hidden off to the side. They again, the Orthodoxy doesn't, they don't let it, you have to be a man over 40. There are like a lot of rules about it. But thank goodness there was a rabbi in California. His name is David Berg, and Madonna found him. And Madonna became interested in Kabbalah, and that blew it open. There was just no way to hide it anymore. Right. Keep it on the side.
Yeah, she's not known for hiding anything.
No, no, exactly. And so through her, I knew about. Well, I knew about it. I knew that it was off to the side, and I couldn't know about it. Yeah. And I had a friend who had tried to study it, and so anyway, so I had this opportunity to go to see Jason Schulman, and I went for the first weekend to Omega. He was there for the weekend. Omega Institute is like a retreat center for like a lot of spiritual kind of teachers.
Yeah. Where is that?
It's in New York. It's like in the Catskills somewhere, I think. And I went there for the weekend, and through that experience, it was the first time ever in my life that I experienced meaningful prayer. Oh. And I was like, wow, here I am. And
so here you am at what age?
Yeah, so this is it was a 4-year program, and I finished it in 2000, right when my father died. That's when I went. Actually, I remember going to Omega, very grieving about my father, and I went into the bookstore and I bought a tape series by Pema Chodron about the places that scare you. And so it all kind of fit together at that point for me. Yes. So I studied with him, and I learned all of Kabbalistic healing, and it just put everything together for me. It really made it all work. And I...
Could you give us a little piece of that? Okay...
Yes.
What does this mean?
Yes. So the idea, what the Kabbalists are trying to figure out is how did creation happen? Mm-hmm. Very basic. And And the idea is like, if you look up at the sun, it's so bright that you can't see anything. But if you take a cloud maybe and it slides over, or you have an eclipse or something like that, it all of a sudden certain parts of the divinity become clear. You can see them a little clearer. And what they have is a tree, it's called the Tree of Life, and the tree is divided into 10 divine attributes. And what you do is try to understand how all the attributes play into each other, and then how if there was some way for you to hold them all together, you would feel the oneness of being. Mm-hmm. So that's the basic idea.
Okay, so here in Pittsburgh, we have a synagogue known as the Tree of Life Synagogue.
Yes.
Is that
No.
related at all?
No.
No. Okay, that's totally separate.
Well, they're
All
probably referring back to the same Tree of Life as
Yeah.
we're referring back to. They're all referring back. It's just like every daughter named Sarah is named originally for the mother Sarah, right?
Right.
Every Tree of Life refers somehow to the original Tree of Life.
Okay.
And the Tree of Knowledge.
Yeah.
In the Garden of Eden, right? But no. So what happened was, there's more to the story, but I'm just going to skip ahead. I got my training, and I got an opportunity to write a book about quilting as a spiritual practice.
Okay,
And
now hold that up so the camera can see it.
So this is the book. It's called The Quilting Path.
Okay.
And it's a spiritual guide, a spiritual discovery through fabric, thread, and Kabbalah. I'll give it to you.
All right.
And I was able to, in 2007, to bring everything together. And the idea of the book, and the idea that has become my life's work, is that anything can be a spiritual practice.
Right.
And for me, it's quilting. And I can teach you the basics of Kabbalah and the basics of quilting, and maybe it'll work for you and you'll want to use quilting as your spirit. But maybe not. Maybe you'll just understand the basics of the process and apply it to whatever is meaningful for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that doing the dishes can be a spiritual practice.
Exactly.
And that's why I don't use the dishwasher. I would rather do the dishes and kind of meditate while I'm doing the dishes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to put this on display. Since you've talked about it a bit. So
That's cute.
yeah. So I know that that's not your only book. You've got another one.
Okay, so I'm going to fast forward, and then if you need any interim, you can, to the pandemic.
Okay.
And when the pandemic, Sarah told you a little bit about SilkDenim, all these, there are a lot of different parts that have happened since then that I continue to work on. But when the pandemic hit, everything kind of got stopped. And I went into a little bit of a panic of myself. And I was 70 years old, and I missed my 70th birthday. Sarah and I were going to go to Machu Picchu, and we didn't get to go. And I just started to think about, what am I doing? And I decided on it for myself, a 10-year plan. And this was a 10-year plan to kind of really be aware and take my career and my life and my kids and everything and try to bring it to some kind of level of completion for myself by the time I'm 80. And just to be, and anything over that is fine, but that I can make this really conscious step in 10 years, a nice amount of time, to really think things through and see where I am, and maybe do a final, it turns out that what I'm doing a final body of work, and just a lot of different things. And so the first thing I did was I wrote a book called A Patchwork Life, and I don't know how you do that, but And
Okay.
this book is a kind of a chronology of everything that I've told you with some pieces missing, but there are 14 chapters. I use the letters A, Patchwork Life. There are 14 letters in those letters.
Okay.
And I used that to write this first text to kind of give me some guidance in the beginning of the 10 years of really where do I want to go and what do I want to do.
Uh-huh.
And
So
yes.
this is a memoir of sorts?
It's a kind of a memoir, but yes, because it is, yes, I would say that's true. And then what happened was I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do next, and I had a relationship with the Heinz History Center because when I moved out of there's a whole part I left about. I live in a really great loft on the south side, and when I moved into that big loft space where I could do all my work, I gave all of my archives at that point in time to the History Center. And so they had a couple what to me seemed really important quilts in my career.
Uh-huh.
And I asked them, can I borrow them? How does it work if you want to use, if I don't know, do I want to do a retrospective? I don't really know, but I'm just exploring it. And through that exploration, I started working with the History Center, with the Jewish archives at the History Center, and I now I'm going to have an exhibition of the history of my work, the herstory of my work, and yes, so that's, yeah.
And that's in September of this year.
It's open September 1st. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is really exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little overwhelming.
So talk about how SilkDenim came about, because I, as I mentioned in my interview with Sarah, I saw the two of you do this little video to promote SilkDenim, and I thought it was hilarious. It's just a couple of minutes long.
Yes,
but
it is.
But there's so much that came through, just your camaraderie and your enjoyment of each other. It's
right.
So talk about that for a little bit.
Well, Sarah was in New York, and she was pretty suffering. It was a really difficult time for her, and she came up with the idea that she would like to have a product to sell. They have a very fancy flea market there, and she had the idea to make this denim bag. And I said, fine, whatever my children have always, I mean, part of my children raising philosophy is whatever they say or want, let's figure it out.
Uh-huh.
That's just the way it goes for me. And so I said, let's figure it out. And so we made the denim bag and did just one thing. Then she came back to Pittsburgh, and just one thing led to another. And we just developed this line and have had very great success with it. And part of that was that I'm married, and my husband is a recycler, a big recycler, and one day he was looking in my garbage. People order. I make a lot of T-shirt quilts, and the T-shirts, they want the logos, but they don't want the bottoms or the sleeves. And I was throwing them all in the garbage. And Steve I saw him one day in the garbage, and he's pulling out the sleeves and the ends. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, you can't put this in the landfill." And I just got really possessive about then they're my sleeves and ends. and that started, like, I have made maybe 30 or 40 remnant quilts of T-shirts, and then we developed clothing that's made of T-shirts, and then we just did a show. We did a play just now at the new Hazlitt Theater, and we did the costumes, and we did it out of the T-shirt ends. All the costumes were made out of the ends.
What was the name of that play?
It was called Apis. It's one of their newer plays, and it's done. You can't see it.
Yeah,
but
is that APIS?
APIS, yeah. Okay. Uh-huh. And
so I'm going to read the reviews.
Yeah, read the reviews. yeah, it's good. And we sold placemats and napkins to Urban Outfitters. We've done a lot of interesting projects as SilkDenim, And it's fun. It's so wonderful to have your daughter want to be with you and learn from you. Like, what could be better than that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something. All right, so you had 2 children yourself, right?
I had 3 children.
You have 3 children.
And Steve has 2 children.
So you've got 5
5.
that you're dealing with.
Blended family, 5.
Grandchildren?
Yes, we have 4 grandchildren.
Okay. That sounds like a full life.
It's very, and there's always something.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Are they after you to make them clothes?
I know I make clothes for SilkDenim, but I never really liked making clothes. Even as a home ec teacher, I always felt like there was just too many problems, and you could always buy it better and cheaper than. It's a little bit different now because of the idea of, fast fashion. There's a lot of issues now, but everybody has their own collection of quilts, and that's really what I make for them. No matter what, there's always another occasion for a quilt.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own collection.
That's where your heart is.
Yes, it is. It is for sure. But like my granddaughters, both of them, and Steve's granddaughter, when they had their bat mitzvahs, I made SilkDenim products, bags made out of men's shirts and denim, and their logos. Everybody got a bag. I do a lot of different things. There's always an occasion for a quilt.
All right, taking the conversation back to spirituality for a minute. So we have the Jewish Louise. We have the mystical Louise. And we have the Buddhist Louise. So have you brought all those aspects together and said, okay, this is me. I have a strong sense now of how all this fits together, and this is where I am with this. And do you have any spiritual practices that you do for your own, I don't want to say enjoyment, for your own growth, for your own spiritual nourishment?
Mm-hmm. Everything works through the quilts. That's number one. And so, for example, I did a whole series of angels, and they are really, it looks like a poncho, but I call it a mantle because it's a covering for this spiritual being. And each of them had a purpose. Angels are very specific in their purpose, very limited in their purpose. Yeah. And so I was able to use the idea of an angel and a purpose to make a quilt that would be an expression of that. So while I'm making the quilt, I'm very much targeted into the subject and also to the process and also to the product. And so it really all comes together for me in that way.
So angels. Where did that come from? Is that part of the Kabbalah?
I think angels came from, I've done many Tree of Lives. I did a whole series of the Tree of Life. Again, looking at the divine attributes, and how did the first angel come about? I don't really know, but I think if you have any kind of spiritual practice or any, I might just start a day by reading something. One of my favorite books is Every Day Zen by Charlotte Choco Beck. And if I'm, by the way, also podcasts. If I'm feeling a little uneasy or like I'm not centered enough in my work, I just turn on Rochester Zen Center and I listen to a Tay show. And so I'm incorporating it all the time.
Okay.
And I quilt a lot of the day. Way more than 40 hours a week.
So I take it that you've got these nimble fingers that have not been affected by arthritis at
No,
your age.
I a little bit of a fear, but I have not. No.
Amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
I was always worried about carpal tunnel too, but
Yeah.
so far so good.
Okay. Well, it's all holding together, and that's
Right. Right.
I mean, that's
I do, Sarah has taught me awareness through movement, Feldenkrais, and I find that incredibly helpful. The awareness through movement, I try to really think about how I'm sitting, or just try to not create any problems for myself.
right.
I mean, that's really, it's about when you're holding in a certain way that is problematic.
Yeah.
Yes. And I do yin yoga. It's really an important resource for me. It's not, most people do this hatha yoga, which is a very movement oriented. Yin yoga is more about the fascia, and it's a much more, it works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've recently, meaning within the last couple of years, been introduced to the importance of your fascia and how that holds you together, and how it's a communication line throughout your body,
Right.
and how all that works together.
Right.
I still haven't taken Sarah's course, but I'm just so intrigued.
And it's easy to take every Monday night at 6 o'clock, no matter anywhere in the world. You could, if you're at 6 o'clock on Monday nights, she does it online. I go sometimes to the Wilkins Community Center where it is, but most times 6 o'clock, I just stop what I'm doing and do awareness through movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm intrigued. In fact, that's how I first got to know Sarah, is that a friend of mine took her course with her and recommended. She said, you gotta talk to this person.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And that's how I got to you.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Well, we are. We are all
Yes,
connected. We're
exactly.
all one.
Yes.
So you say you did listen to my podcast with Sarah, so you have an idea of how this works. We're getting toward the end of our time.
Okay.
Which means I'm going to ask you to leave the audience with a few words of wisdom.
Yes.
So this is your opportunity, whatever you'd like them to take away from this.
Yes. Unfortunately, or fortunately, anyway, one of the major pieces at the History Center, the one piece that I'm going to do as an installation in the History Center, is called, it's about when you become a bubby. That's a grandmother in Yiddish. I became a bubby, and I decided that I would be called myself Bubby Wisdom.
Oh.
Because I wanted to be a new kind of bubby. I didn't want to be, I'm happy to make chicken soup and all that stuff, but I really wanted to be more than that. And so I have a whole website that's called Bubby Wisdom. And in the History Center, I have just made 1,152 wisdoms that will be at the History Center, and I have some stitchers, hopefully, that are going to work with me. We're going to keep adding wisdoms during the exhibit. And during the last 6 weeks of the exhibit, people will be invited to come and take the wisdoms away. So literally, I have 1,152 wisdoms plus the hopefully 1,500 wisdoms.
Okay, we don't have time
No.
for 1,152.
But I want to put the plug in that you think, with me, you get one quilt? No. You get 100 quilts. With me, you get one wisdom? No, you get 100 wisdoms. Okay, having said that, I just want to tell you that I'm really on wisdoms.
Okay.
And so I thought very long and hard about which wisdom I was going to give you, because I have so many. And I decided on two. Okay. One is from Jack Cornfield, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. And the second one is from Rabbi David Cooper, and it is God is a Verb.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that one. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, for me, the entry point.
Uh-huh.
Because once you understand it's the process,
Yeah,
then you can be on go.
that's beautiful. In fact, I'm so keyed on God as a verb that I need you to repeat the first one again.
Jack Kornfield,
Yeah.
his title of his last book was called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. You still have to do the work.
Yeah,
Never goes away.
right. Very true. Okay, audience, you've heard it. After the ecstasy, you still have to do the laundry. So do the work. And God is a verb. So let that sit with you for a while. And as always, take what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf, and just pull it down when you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.